Hello everyone, welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. One thing that we've stressed recently is how the actions and policies of the Obama administration are perceived outside the United States. Consider the chaotic influx of illegal immigration that we've been seeing at America's southern border in recent weeks. Why are so many young undocumented immigrants flooding across the border now? Well, let's go back 2 years to a statement that President Obama made on the White House lawn. This is from June 15th, 2012.
This morning, Secretary Napolitano announced new actions my administration will take to mend our nation's immigration policy, to make it more fair, more efficient, and more just, specifically for certain young people, sometimes called dreamers. Effective immediately, the Department of Homeland Security is taking steps to lift the shadow of deportation from these young people. Over the next few months, eligible individuals who do not present a risk to national security or public safety will be able to request temporary relief from deportation proceedings and apply for work authorization.
Now, that executive action only applied to immigrants that had been in America for 5 years. It essentially gave them an opportunity to come out of the shadows without fear of being deported, made them eligible for work permits, Social Security cards, driver's licenses, and so on. And nearly 600,000 immigrants benefited from this executive action, known as the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. Now, last week, the administration laid out guidelines for how these immigrants could defer deportation for yet another 2 years. And this is what the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, announced on June the 5th. This, again, is just from last week. He said, despite the acrimony and partisanship that now exists in Washington, almost all of us agree that a child who crossed our border illegally with a parent or in search of a parent or a better life was not making an adult choice to break our laws and should be treated differently than adult lawbreakers. By the renewal of DACA, we act in accord with our values and the code of this great nation. Now, as I said, this executive action doesn't apply to new arrivals, but that hasn't stopped them from showing up in droves. Some of them are even begging to be arrested because they know if President Obama won't deport those who are eligible for DACA, he surely won't deport the new arrivals either.
This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world.
And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
We're still recording from Armstrong Auditorium. You can see, however, that the set behind me is a little bit different. We've got another musical coming up here in a week and a half, another Ryan Malone musical called The Morning Star. That will be playing on this stage on June 22nd, Sunday at 3 p.m. And if you're local or you live close to Edmond here, it's a free concert, and you can call 285-1010 if you're interested in some complimentary tickets to that one performance, which will have quite a few of our young people, our teenagers, here on campus performing, as I said, here on this stage. All right, going back to what I covered there in the monologue, I want to bring out some alarming immigration figures. You've seen them discussed in the news media this past week. I noticed from the Washington Times just today or yesterday's edition, saying that the figures that are being reported aren't as high as they really should be. It talked about how leading up to that announcement that we showed you at the top from 2012, that pretty much the number of unaccompanied minors that were trying to enter into America averaged about 7,000 to 8,000 per year. That's pre-2013. And then how last year that figure jumped to 40,000 young people, unaccompanied, that tried to get across our borders. Many of them, of course, did. And then this year, the projection is 90,000. Next year, it's supposed to be 142,000. So here what we're experiencing now is unsustainable. But when you look at the way this is trending, it's frightening to think about the direction that this nation is headed. How is the United States, how are the taxpayers, how is the government going to be able to care for or provide for these young people coming in from many Central American nations, Mexico, and so on? Here's how the White House responded. This is a comment from President Obama, June 2nd. He said the influx of unaccompanied alien children at the southwest border of the United States has resulted in an urgent humanitarian situation requiring a unified and coordinated federal response. So it's an urgent situation that requires a swift response from the United States. And of course, the response is not to lock down the border. It's certainly not to send the illegals home. The response is to, well, as I quoted at the top from Jay Johnson, it's to treat them differently, because after all, these are youths. These are young people. These are young people in search of families, parents. And so a lot of youths are taking off, some of them making a 1,000-mile journey across Mexico to get into the United States while they can, the way they're looking at it. They're coming from all over, Guatemala, from Nicaragua, Honduras, Mexico as well. They know the word has spread that they're going to be treated differently if they can just get across the border. And of course, if you know that what waits for you there is free citizenship or health care or other welfare benefits, well, it's hard not to identify with them. We'd probably make the same decision if we were down there viewing this wide open door at the southern border of the United States. White House budget officials informed lawmakers the other day that the projected cost for caring for these illegals is going to run over $2 billion next year as we look to provide temporary housing for them, food, shelter, so on. Last week, Attorney General Eric Holder announced that the administration would pay for 100 attorneys to help young illegals remain in the United States. I mean, you see the picture that these illegals see from abroad. They see a United States that's there with open arms welcoming them in, taking them in, hiring lawyers for them so that they can stay here. And meanwhile, I mean, over the past year, you've probably seen reports as well of how many criminal illegal aliens, those that have been arrested for crimes, have been released just because of overcrowding or because of these kinds of policies coming out of Washington. 36,000 last year alone were released from jail. I mean, how much longer can it go on when you're releasing common criminals from jail and when you're opening up the border? I mean, this, in so many ways, it's a problem of our own making. It goes beyond even just one administration, but what we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years, it's certainly accelerated these trends. It's made the problem worse. This is from Representative Bob Goodlatte. I think he's from Virginia, a Republican. He said the recent surge of children and teenagers from Central America showing up at our southern border is an administration-made disaster, and now President Obama is calling in FEMA to mitigate the damage. He says, word has gotten out. Notice this. Word has gotten out. He's talking about the other nations. Again, how they perceive these announcements that we're making, these executive actions that are being taken. He says, word has gotten out around the world about President Obama's lax immigration enforcement policies, and it has encouraged more individuals to come to the United States illegally, many of whom are children from Central America. He continues saying, illegal border crossing is extremely dangerous, and many of these children encounter drug and human traffickers along the way. Enforcement at the border and in the interior of the U.S., he says, is crucial to end these kinds of situations. Not another bureaucratic task force, not bringing FEMA along, not putting them in these military bases all over the country, including right here in Oklahoma, one of them, Fort Sill. And that's what's happening. Or as you heard last week, perhaps, hundreds of them, over 1,000, just bust into Arizona and dropped off, leaving them there for that state to take care of. A humanitarian disaster, if ever there was one. And the response here, as he brings out, that representative, is to add more bureaucracy, to throw more money at the problem, to spend more money, to spend more taxpayer dollars to try to solve this problem. Senator Ted Cruz, he said it's a direct consequence, this disaster, it's a direct consequence of the president's illegal actions. The parents think, if I send my child to the U.S., my child will have amnesty. That's what the President of the U.S. has said. It is the exact opposite of a humane approach to immigration or to securing our borders. See, it's so dangerous for them to make this trek across Mexico, coming into contact, as was brought out from that previous quote, with all kinds of drug traffickers and so on. Very dangerous. How many are dying even along the way? Talk about a humanitarian disaster. And all because the border of the United States is so porous, it's not secure at all. This is from the Washington Times, June 9th. The children's surge is another consequence of the president making good on his vow to fundamentally transform America. America is being transformed right before our eyes. What a change in the way America looks today compared to just a few decades ago. What a difference. And many Americans, in case you haven't noticed, many Americans are alarmed by these developments. We had an election just yesterday in Virginia where the House Majority Leader lost a primary to someone from the Tea Party because he's seen, you know, among the Republican base, that House Majority Leader was seen as one that was really pro-amnesty, right in step with the administration. And so there's quite a movement, at least within Republican/Tea Party circles, to try to do something to solve these problems, to do something to secure the border of the United States. It's really too little too late, but it does certainly highlight just how serious the situation is and how many people, like you perhaps, who are very disturbed by what's happening, who are alarmed by these images that we're just not used to seeing right here in the United States, in Arizona, in Texas, in other states as well. Patrick Buchanan, a conservative commentator, he wrote a book a few years ago titled The Day of Reckoning, and he talked a lot in that book about immigration. And he pointed out how that prior to 1970, most of America's immigrants were European. They came from Europe. They came from Western nations. Most, prior to that time, assimilated into American society, American culture. But how that after 1970, most have come from third world countries in Asia, Latin America, and so on. And many of them have not assimilated into American society. Let me just give you one quote from his book. He said, unlike the Ellis Island generations, all of whom came from Europe, those pouring in today come from countries, continents, and cultures whose peoples have never before been assimilated by a first world nation. He says, and they're coming in far greater numbers than any nation has ever absorbed. History has never seen an invasion like this. For there are more illegal aliens in the United States today than all the Irish, Jews, and English who ever came, and the total number of immigrants here now almost equals the total number who came in the 350 years from the birth of Jamestown to the inauguration of JFK, John F. Kennedy, back in the 1960s. You talk about a transformation, as he highlights in his book. I mean, there's nothing in history that's been like this. Now, he wrote that book in 2007. And that was 7 years ago. The day of reckoning is coming. I mean, it's here. It's upon us. What a transformation we're witnessing. Let's look at a couple of verses in the Bible, Genesis 49 to begin with, and understand the significance of this prophetically. That's what you don't hear in the widespread news coverage of what's happening in Arizona and Texas and elsewhere. We don't get God's perspective. We can tell you why this is happening, and it's not going to get any better until Jesus Christ returns. And I think most with common sense can see that. I mean, once those floodgates open, how do you reverse that? How do you push it back? You don't hear anything in the news about trying to push it back or trying to take them back home. Where do they take them? I mean, particularly if they're coming from 500, 600, 700 miles away. If they're coming from Central America, I mean, what do you do with tens of thousands of them? It is a disaster. It's a nightmare. But much of it is our own fault. It's our own doing, as was brought out in a couple of those quotes. In the United States and Britain in prophecy, Mr. Armstrong, Herbert Armstrong, talks a lot about these prophecies here in Genesis 49, about the end-time Israelites. Joseph, in particular, in that book, Mr. Armstrong identifies how the early American immigrants came largely from England, obviously, and other European nations. And he says, going back to their biblical tribe, that many of these immigrants were from the tribe of Manasseh. Manasseh, the brother of Ephraim, the twin brother of Ephraim. Both of those tribes are identified in the United States and Britain in prophecy. Ephraim, of course, was to become a great multitude or company of nations. I don't have time to go through all the scriptures on this, but Manasseh was to be this single great power on earth in these latter days. Here in Genesis 49, verse 22, it says, Joseph is a fruitful bow, even a fruitful bow by a wall, whose branches run over the wall. See, Joseph's descendants, those people of Ephraim and Manasseh, Ephraim in particular, they were to be a colonizing people. They were to spread over all the earth. And they certainly did do that. And then over time, of course, we saw the tribe of Manasseh break away from them back during the days of the Revolutionary War. Now, as Mr. Armstrong brought out in the U.S. and Britain, he asked the question, well, how could Manasseh or the United States be Manasseh when many of our immigrants came from nations besides England? And he went on to explain in his book, citing passages in Amos 9, how that all of the Israelites were to be sifted through the nations after they went into captivity with the Assyrians and so on. It wasn't that all of Manasseh ended up into England. They were really scattered all throughout northwestern Europe. And how that after the United States was established, the many, many years thereafter, where immigrants came in the tens of thousands each year, that many of them, not all of them, but many of them were coming from similar backgrounds. Many of them were coming from Manasseh, or they were of the tribe of Manasseh. It's very different, though, than what you see today. I'm not talking about this, to try to pit one race against another. I'm just pointing out to you the reality of the history and the prophecy. What happened historically, much of that covered in the U.S. and Britain in prophecy, and then what we can expect to happen in these latter days. This is one quote from Mr. Armstrong's book. He said, "Thus we have become known," he's speaking of Manasseh here, "we've become known as the melting pot of the world. Instead of refuting our Manasseh ancestry, this fact actually confirms it. The proof that we are Manasseh is overwhelming." I mean, leave aside all the blessings that God just poured down upon our nation and the great power that we had, which reached its apex right at the World War II region or period. Leave that aside. I mean, the fact that we've sort of been this melting pot of many different peoples, that too confirms our identity, because that was something the Israelites did in the Old Testament. Even when God told them not to, they generally did blend in with many peoples around them. And for a time, while the blessings God poured upon Manasseh were happening, it was able to continue, particularly when you had all of them coming in and assimilating to American culture and society. But it's a very different United States today. Deuteronomy 28. Let me just show you what God prophesies here with respect to the Israelites of our day. Deuteronomy 28, as he brings out in that quote I gave to you, the fact that, you know, the melting pot, or America was referred to as that melting pot, it really does highlight, again, who we are. And then the fact, too, that you see a lot of that falling apart. The melting pot is cracking, really, leaking all over the place. Deuteronomy 28 here, and verse 43, it says, "The stranger or the foreigner that is within you shall get up above you very high, and you shall come down very low." Verse 44 says, "He shall lend to you, and you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail." So what we're seeing today, all these lax immigration policies, the weak borders, the open door at the southern border of the United States, I mean, all of these things are playing an instrumental role in prophecies such as this in Deuteronomy 28 being fulfilled. Look at how much of an impact these developments are having on just the very nature and makeup of the United States. And consider, again, these prophecies uttered thousands of years ago. Consider the accuracy of these prophecies. I mean, God said this would happen. And as I said earlier, I mean, the floodgates are open. And if it's already going to be 140-some thousand next year, what will it be in 2016? It's an unsustainable path that we're on. Back to Pat Buchanan's book, he said the likelihood of her survival as one nation through mid-century is improbable and impossible if America continues on her current course, for we are on a path to national suicide. That's the truth. And really, we would say that the timetable is even shorter than what Mr. Buchanan suggests there. We're certainly still on the path that he talked about 7 years ago when he released that book. It's worse, much worse today. How much longer can it go on? That's the question. I mean, I guess that's the one answer. We don't know for sure. But we can certainly look at the signs of the times and know, as Jesus said, when it is near, when it's at the door. We can't know the specific day or the hour, but we can certainly know that we're drawing close. This little booklet, it's not about immigration specifically, but it certainly does discuss some similar subjects. America under attack, that's really what we're seeing. Of course, there's some heart-rending stories that you see from a mother and a child that try to come up from Nicaragua or wherever. But if you step back and look at this on the mass scale that it is, it's an attack. It's an attack on the United States. It's this huge, gaping, self-inflicted wound. And it's only going to get bigger. Make sure that you call the number on your screen there and request America Under Attack so that you can understand what's happening to the United States today, this great nation that descended mostly from Manasseh, discussed there in Genesis 49 and elsewhere. America Under Attack. If you don't want to call, you can of course go to our website, thetrumpet.com, to request your free copy online. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the Trumpet Daily.